Call to order the January 3rd, 2023 meeting of the North Andover Planning Board. Kelly, remotely, can you hear me?
Yes, that kind of works now. Great, thank you.
Excellent. Pursuant to Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022, this meeting of the North Andover Planning Board will be conducted in person and via remote means in accordance with applicable law. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and or parties with a right and requirement to attend this meeting can be found on the town's website at www.northandoverma.gov. For this meeting, in-person attendance of members of the public and board members will be permitted. Members of the public who wish to watch the meeting live may do so on their televisions by tuning to Comcast Channel 8, Verizon Channel 26, or online at www.northandovercam.org. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. In the event that we are unable to do so despite best efforts, we will post on the Town of North Andover website an audio or video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of proceeding as soon as possible after the meeting. If members of the public would like to participate in public hearings but not attend the meeting in person, please email your question or comment prior to or during the meeting to Jean Enright at jenright@northandoverma.gov. The question or comment will be read during the proceeding and responded to accordingly. Why don't we take roll?
Alyssa Koenig. Here. Sean Kevlin.
Here.
Eitan Goberg.
I'm here.
Peter Boynton.
Here.
Kelly Comier.
Here.
Remotely. And John Simons has not arrived yet.
Okay. We have 3 continued public hearings that all have either been continued or are requesting continuances. So 0 Turnpike Street, Middleton Farms LLC has requested a continuance until January 17th. 1701 Osgood Street Extra Space Storage LLC has requested a continuance until January 17th. Those are both allowed, so those will both be continued until that date. 14 Second Street and 149 Main Street, Second and Main LLC was already continued until January 17th, 2023. Those are all the continued public hearings. Those will all continue on January 17th, 2023. Discussion items. Potential zoning bylaw amendments, inclusionary housing requirement, floodplain. Jean?
Okay, so as discussed at the last meeting, Amy Maxter, the Conservation Administrator, is here to present on the floodplain proposed amendment and answer any questions you may have.
Okay, let's do that.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Amy Maxner. I'm a Conservation Administrator. And also, I'm not a floodplain expert or NFIP expert either. So you may ask me questions that I cannot answer. I figured I'd start with just a general explanation of what the National Flood Insurance Program is. And in 1968, Congress created the National Flood Insurance Act, and basically was aimed to provide flood insurance to residents, as private insurance carriers didn't always or don't always offer the same, and they're free to offer whatever they feel at whatever premiums they would like. So this NFIP program is administered through the Federal Emergency Management Agency. But the catch is that residents can receive this insurance only if their communities participate in having their own floodplain management ordinances or bylaws. And these bylaws need to meet the minimum requirements required by FEMA and NFIP. So North Andover has its own floodplain overlay district bylaw, and it does participate in NFIP. And I tried to find out when our bylaw was adopted, but I worked with the town clerk, but we just couldn't find the inception date. So we have to maintain compliance with NFIP in our bylaw, and FEMA is tasked by Congress to review communities' floodplain maps every 5 years. So they review them, and then they decide whether they're going to update them. When I came on board in June of 2019, FEMA was in the midst of doing an update to the Essex County flood map panels. And at that time, they had draft maps for review. The building inspector and I went to a workshop, probably that July, took home the maps, reviewed them with DPW. Jean was part of that, just to see if they passed the sniff test. People with knowledge of the town and flooding areas, they didn't have any problems with those changes. And so FEMA just, continues on with our comments, and it was anticipated that they would be ready to make those finalized for this spring or early summer. And in conjunction with that, FEMA had a model bylaw language that we needed to adopt to stay in compliance. And so we needed our bylaw to be adopted at the same time that the maps were going to be finalized. And this isn't the first time that FEMA has required that, because in our research, town clerk found that in 2004, amendments per FEMA's requirements were adopted. So, this is a periodic thing. The language that we're adopting this time around just ensures that whatever is not covered by federal or state floodplain regulations are covered by local regulations. So, there's the state building code, the Wetlands Protection Act, and Title V all have some level or their fingers in floodplain management to some extent, but there's other things that aren't covered by these state or federal regs that need to be incorporated into local ordinances and bylaws. So basically, that is what these amendments are aimed at. So the draft amendments that you have been reviewed by my FEMA contact. He had very minor edits to offer, and actually in his review, he found that our current bylaw had the incorrect effective date for the maps. So the real effective date right now is 2018. So every time maps are amended, we have to in kind amend our bylaw to reflect that date. So let's see. So I just wanted to give you some notable changes in the proposed amendments. One of them being officially designating a floodplain manager. Right now, our bylaw.
We can't get that on this.
No, it's not working.
Sorry?
No, it's not working. So he tried, that's why we were delayed a little bit. He was trying to fix that.
I can give you a copy. Officially designating a floodplain manager.
Go there so I can see it.
It is attached to the agenda. It's the PowerPoint, it's a PDF,
And our current bylaw
a PDF of a.
mentions the building inspector throughout a few different sections. So, it's just basically having its own section of designating a specific staff person or staff position, and that helps FEMA, streamline communications, and, that the person can change, but the position is there for constant contact, basically. The other one is establishing an actual separate floodplain permit. And this ensures that all development or man-made changes within the floodplain are properly reviewed and regulated for compliance with the bylaw. So, if it doesn't come under a building permit or a conservation permit, it still gets caught to make sure that whatever they're doing, whether it's construction, a shed, a fence, still complies with the bylaw.
So,
Go ahead.
so can I ask about that?
Yes.
So like, I remember, my prior house was in the floodplain, and I needed flood insurance to get the mortgage. So, this is good that we have this, we can do that. But I wanted to build a fence, so I got a small project, permission from the Conservation Commission. Are you saying would that change, and you'd also need some other type of permit? Because that was hard enough just
Yeah.
building a small fence to keep
Right.
my kids in.
Right.
So I just
Yeah.
don't want to add too many layers of complexity if you don't
No,
have to.
generally, if you're in the floodplain, well, not every activity requires something from the commission, but the Conservation Commission, but, there could possibly be a gradation of types of permits. I mean, my FEMA contact, said, we're not going to regulate what that looks like. Plenty of other communities have permits in place that we can look at and maybe use as templates or tailor for North Andover and, like I said, have a gradation of complexity of,
So what I would
projects.
envision is, we have an online viewpoint permitting system,
Yeah.
that if somebody's coming before the building department to get a building permit, and they also need a dumpster permit, the dumpster permit's just embedded within the building permit, and they get two different documents. So I would envision this goes through whatever regulatory agency they have to, and then when the building commissioner issues the permit, he's gonna be issuing both.
But I guess, so that's fine, and right, if you get conservation, then you can get one, but is there some sort of activities that don't currently require any permitting, that this would now require some sort of floodplain permit for? Thank you. And if so,
I know,
who would issue that?
it's hard to think of that.
So maybe that can be just something we think about. I just don't want, I just aware of any unintended consequences of adding a permit that is not necessarily clear about what it covers. So just because you're in the floodplain, if you wanted to do something and you didn't require a permit, would you get held up because you didn't get a permit? I mean, I don't know how that would actually work, because you'd start doing the work, but then realize I'm in the floodplain. Who do I have to go to for a permit if you don't necessarily need one? I mean, most things that you do of consequence will require some sort of permit, but I just like to look at that a little closer.
Yep. No, good question. And so another notable change is there are zones that do not have a base flood elevation assigned to it. It wasn't provided by FEMA. And in that case, it names the sources of information that the building inspector can turn to in order to establish his ability to regulate the project, or it's either new construction or substantial improvements, or any other activity that would trigger review. Specific language required around
Can I,
enforcement. Yeah, go ahead.
Ask about that.
Sure.
Base flood elevation data. I mean, that seems to me to be, a bit of an in-the-weeds detail, but an important one for homeowners or home buyers or people wanting to do projects that they would need access to accurate
Right.
flood elevation data. And do we have a lot of areas in our floodplain that we do not have FEMA-based elevation
We have
data?
some. Yep, we do.
And it wasn't clear to me in your description, what are we using for those areas where FEMA does not have elevation data?
Well, it's usually in my experience, it's usually that the private homeowner has engaged a civil engineer to do those, you know, that evaluation and calculations and come up with, you know, an elevation based on, you know, surrounding properties, other, you know, relative topography.
So, just so that I can better understand this, so let's say there's an area where FEMA doesn't have the elevation data. A private homeowner's paying an engineer to calculate that. Then if the next door neighbor needs it, they also have to pay a private, I mean, it seems like an incredibly inefficient way to get that done. And I'm not critical of what you're doing, I'm just, it seems like a very inefficient and expensive way to go about filling in data where FEMA does not provide it. Or do I not understand this correctly?
No, so I think it's a similar process when a homeowner is trying to get away from the requirement of insurance. They hire an engineer, and it's called something, you might know better.
Letter of map revision or.
Letter of map revision.
Aha, to show that
amendments.
they're not in the
They're
flood
they're
zone.
not in it,
Yes.
and that was common practice in 2018 when the maps
Yes,
changed. We had
because you
people
don't-
coming all the time to the counter,
Correct.
and we would share the neighbors' information
Gotcha.
with them, and then I think they would use that to also file.
Gotcha. Okay, that helps to clarify it, because that's a potential big cost.
Yep, I remember in 2018, it was commonplace. People were coming regularly to the counter, so when those maps changed, and then they'd go through the process to get themselves out of the requirement for flood insurance.
Right, because,
And I think often we're successful.
yeah, I mean, because flood insurance is, I mean, it's a set price. It's like
Right.
$3,000 a year. I mean, it's, so if you can get out, it's worthwhile. If
Yeah,
you don't want to be
pay for
covered by it.
itself pretty quickly.
Well, yeah, I mean, it doesn't really cover anything, so. Continue.
Okay. Let's see. So they are requiring specific language around and actually enforcing the floodplain bylaw. So what I did was just borrow from existing language in our zoning bylaw. It seemed very boilerplate enough to plug in here. And again, you know, in talking with my FEMA contact, you know, he's like, we're not gonna we need something that's, you know, specific enough and, you know, how it's done, you know, and process, so.
And is this something that normally town council would take a look at, or?
I have shared this with her, and so I'll definitely follow up. It's in her hands, so, yep, we'll definitely do that. And then just finally, just various definitions, whether they be revising existing definition in our current bylaw or adding additional definitions that NFIP would like to see.
So given the changes, and I'm not sure if you looked at the detail of the amendment, but we have to talk to town council about kind of sunsetting the previous bylaw and replacing it with this language, to not confuse people, because going through the individual
Yeah,
red
it's
line
kind of-
edits, it's pretty
Yeah.
cumbersome. And so sunset it, start fresh with a brand-new bylaw.
That makes sense.
Okay.
That makes sense. Okay. Kelly, any questions or comments?
No, nothing additional, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else?
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Amy.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Okay.
Gina, anything else you want to add on inclusionary today?
So the only thing is, it's still in the same form you saw last meeting, and so if anybody does have any comment or feedback on that, I'd appreciate it.
Okay.
And I have also provided that to town council, who didn't express any concerns.
Okay. Very good.
I will alert you to one more
Okay.
that is in the infant stages. So Brian and I are working on kind of separating out Dover uses from the special permit requirement and site plan. So still a formal process with the planning board, but kind of separating out the fact that to date, we've required a special permit for uses that are protected, religious, educational, and daycare centers by the Dover Amendment. Merrimack College and Brooks have been really supportive in going through our entire process, but someday there's going to come a time that we're going to need to differentiate. And so what I've suggested, and Brian and I are working on, is just, right now, our bylaw for site plan review is very specific. It says it's by special permit. If that's letter B, adding a C, except for uses under protected for Dover, and then just pointing to a different information required for Dover, and then being compliant with Mass statute. There's 7 criteria that can be reasonably regulated, and so we'll just go through that process. So it'll be more of a plan review than a special permit. And that's very similar to the zoning we were proposing for Royal Crest Estates. That was going to be a plan review. The Osgood bylaw is a plan review, so it's just different regulatory requirements for that.
What would happen in a situation, so if Merrimack's building a dorm, right?
Yep.
So that's pretty clearly could be under Dover. What would happen in a situation where if there's not an agreement as to whether it qualifies under Dover? So let's say a college is building a hotel.
So that's the building commissioner's determination, as it was for the trustees of reservations, if you remember at 137 Andover Street.
Yeah.
He determines whether something is subject to the Dover Amendment, and the application would require his sign-off.
Okay. All right. So that's.
So we've saw some other applications, one of which from Andover, it doesn't have his signature, but I'm advocating for his signature on that application in order for it to even proceed under that bylaw.
And I'd still want the planning board to be able to at least comment on that.
Yeah, it's not your determination, it's under a zoning bylaw, it will be the building commissioner's determination. He's the zoning enforcement officer.
Usually that comes after it's built.
No, for anything to even get to you,
About whether.
he has to determine that the use is allowed.
Right. But the use would be allowed, it's just a question of which permit it goes under, right?
So he'd be determined the use is allowed under the Dover or not under the Dover. And that's who we went to for the trustees. That was the first real controversial one, I would say. There were people were questioning that. But that was his determination, and that's on file as a finding of fact in that decision.
Okay, well, right, so we'd have to find as a finding of fact that it qualifies.
Yeah.
So if we disagreed, we could.
Based on his determination. So that's coming. I'm hoping to have a draft by the 17th, but I should.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, May 16th, 2023, annual town meeting calendar.
So that's just in your, hold on, let me just bring it up quick. So it follows the same, intended to have 3 public hearings on any zoning amendment. If a citizen petition were to come in later in the process, then we would have to open up a new public hearing for that. But otherwise, it just lays out the dates. I'd have to go to the Tribune with these zoning amendments, and these 3 are the only ones that I'm aware of at this time.
So when would be our first planned public hearing?
So without sharing this.
You don't need to share, just.
February 28th,
February 20th, okay,
March 7th, and March 21st.
okay.
The citizen petition deadline is March 13th, and so if they were to come in, then we start over again with a new public hearing for that.
Okay. 123 Bonnie Lane, drainage channel water quality testing, so saw your note in there.
Okay, so at the last meeting, I suggested I just reach out to the water treatment plant to see if they do testing at that location, and they have done testing. And so they shared their results of total phosphorus and orthophosphate. They were consistent with other results from the standard testing locations they do around the lake on a regular basis. And so I shared everything with Peter to make sure that it was addressing the concerns he had. So Peter, I don't know if you have anything to add, but.
Yeah, I thought it was very thorough, terrific, well-done map and diagram of the flow. So it is the intermittent stream I was looking at, and just thought it was really helpful. Thank you for tracking that down. I did have a question after I told you that I was fine with it. And so I thought I would ask that now.
I didn't not anticipate that, Peter, but okay.
So, I know they said that they regularly test, but then when the water treatment plant provided the tables with the test results,
Yeah.
Bonnie Lane is not on the table. And so then I started thinking, well, if they regularly test it, why wasn't Bonnie Lane in the table?
Right, so my interpretation was that they don't regularly test it with those other sites, but they did test it in April and October of that year.
And that's it.
I don't think it's on their regular schedule. But, I mean, it shows the others are regularly tested, and it is well within the parameters of all the other test sites.
Well, it is for those snapshot tests, but, I mean, what I think we could expect is potential seasonal variation, so I don't know what it means that it was tested on those 2 dates. You know, would it ever be tested again, at what frequency? And, I mean, it's right off the street. Is there a,
It's right off the street, but it's well into somebody's property.
yeah, but,
And there is easement there, but
yeah. I'm curious why it's not part of the regular testing.
okay.
Is that okay to be curious and ask about that?
Sure. I mean, I think the most relevant point for at least our discussion about the watershed special permits are whether or not this area is being, with, you know, the added pool that we approved
Right.
is different or having a different effect in other areas and things like that. So it looks like it's not, at least at this point, based on the data that we have.
But now we know that that was just a snapshot as opposed to regular testing.
Right.
And so that's a little concerning to me. And furthermore, if we have, to your point, with the watershed special permit, let's say we have another one before us, it may be that we have no benefit of regular historical data because, oh, that was the only 2 times we tested it.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was part of the regular testing, we would then have access to that trend data, which to me is the most important. Is it getting worse? Is it getting better?
Yeah.
Is it steady? And in this case, I mean, there are some areas, like there's a stream that drains into the cove by Mad Maggie's that's actually pretty difficult to access.
Yeah.
It's really swampy and you gotta walk a ways and it's just thick brush. But this is, I mean, it steps off the road, so it's really easy. I think it's worth asking. That's the reason I'm asking, that it could be of benefit to us. And, I mean, that's a sizable development there, and it has drainage through that, and,
Can I ask and see what?
Yeah.
The other question I had is, when we get these watershed special permit requests, is it possible to get, I guess, how difficult is it to kind of get, like, the last years of data near the area where that's going to be part of our so instead of asking for it after the fact, like when a pool permit comes in, could we get the most recent data, like not asking them to do anything new, but the most recent data from the area closest to that pool, so we just have it already?
so we've been talking not about that specifically, but about the utility of the testing data for the special permit granting function of this planning board. And that is the best articulation of sort of utility of that data
Right, how we can actually take it
for
and
this
use it.
special permitting granting authority. I love the way you've described it, and I hope it is not too much to ask, because that is what we should have. If you think about it, it's one of the very few objective sources of
Right.
data we have.
And it's already there, right? They're doing it already, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, as long as we can get it and say, okay, the closest area was tested in April and October, and this is what it showed, I think it would probably be very beneficial to the homeowners too, because most of the time the data is going to be good.
right.
And so, okay, so we don't really have a problem with this pool because we know what's already there. So I think it would just be a helpful thing maybe to add to just that process. Okay, cool. All right.
Can we have like a summary of that in the meeting minutes of what he just said, what he just asked for? Yeah, thanks. Because it was really well stated. I don't want to be, building you up here too
No,
much,
no.
but it really was well stated.
Next
Thank
thing,
you.
take me down. Can we get a motion to approve the meeting minutes
So
from
moved.
December 20th? Motion made. Second. All in favor? Alyssa?
Yes.
I vote yes.
Aye.
Kelly?
Yes.
All right. Anybody before we adjourn?
Have we noted that planning director's been designated as the employee of the year?
We have not. So yes, there was a notification that went out today
Yes.
saying that, and this is a nomination from other employees, and that Jean got multiple nominations. I heard she was kind of like soliciting. No. So.
Yeah, no whole campaign going.
The grassroots campaign. No, very, very, very well deserved. Frankly, be our vote every year, but share it sometimes. But congratulations, you work super hard.
Super well deserved. Just unbelievable what you bring of value to the board, the department, the town, and really glad that you're being recognized for it. It's just really impressive. It's a great model of what you do.
Thank you.
Even if you can't eat dinner in town. Thanks,
Congratulations, Pete.
thanks, Kelly. All right, can we get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion made. All in favor, Alyssa?
Yes.
I vote yes. Peter?
Aye.
Kelly?
Yes,
All right, see everyone on the 17th.
thank you.